Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today our subject is politics in South Africa, and our viewers have heard many discussions of this subject. I think today's program will be somewhat different. Our guest is Tomsanqa Linda, who is the co-president of the United Consolation Party of South Africa. He's also a former mayor of one of the cities of South Africa. And what makes his appearance, I think, somewhat different from those of others discussing the subject is that one would have to describe our guest as very anti-Nelson Mandela and the position that Mr. Mandela takes. Our guest is on tour throughout the United States, and the John Birch Society called us and asked us if we would like to interview Mr. Lindy while he was in our city, and we are doing that today. I'm very pleased to welcome to the program Janelle Burke, our panelist, to also welcome our guest and to assist in the questioning. Janelle Burke is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Welcome to our program. To set the stage for our viewers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in politics in your country?
I've been involved in politics with the ANC. As the years go by, we changed tactics because we could see it was not it was when the ANC was established. It had some lot of other funny little things. I changed over to become a businessman in South Africa. I involved myself as an activist within the political system in South Africa, where I was fighting for the eradication of the apartheid system. For some time, I became involved with that, and when the government introduced the homeland system, I was interested in trying to find out what this system was going to achieve for the people of South Africa. When the government again introduced Act 102 of 1982, I was involved in presenting myself as a candidate to those elections which we held in the black townships.
And so you've served as a mayor in your city, is that correct?
Yes.
And what does a mayor do in your system? Much the same kind of thing that a mayor in our system does, or do you have greater influence over the people in your area?
Yes, I would say you've got greater influence. In a situation like South Africa, where there was a vacuum within the political system with black people, you had a situation where you find yourself, whether you are elected for civic politics, you find yourself being a politician in that kind of a situation.
And I take it that you feel very close to your people, and that is one of the messages that you want to get across today, how the rank and file, the average South African, might look at the system.
Yes, you are so close to your people. You know the problems that your people daily are facing in a country like South Africa.
And what do you consider to be the greatest problem? Or a number of problems that...
A number of problems, but the greatest problem in South Africa this present day is jobs, where you find people who have no jobs. Another problem is housing for some years, but we happen to tackle this problem with the South African government. But I've said many times in South Africa that the putting up of houses was not something which people should be looking at the government only. The government could help, but at the same time, we should involve everybody. The private sector must be heavily involved. That's when we start to alleviate the housing shortage in South Africa.
I would like to ask some rather candid questions and let you respond. I have some of your releases, and in those releases you've indicated the following. Nelson Mandela is not a hero in my country. He is a militant communist who pours gasoline on the embers of apartheid. You also say about Mr. Mandela that Mandela is not a friend of African blacks, but has terrorized them in order to silence their opposition to his violence. Let me just continue a little bit to say that many Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, who have been to South Africa and observed apartheid, it has separated the races, and very much like the days when we had slavery in this country, isn't it true that Nelson Mandela and others have worked to bring an end to that system?
I think we are still staying in the same areas where we're staying in South Africa. Even if we would have a South Africa where there will be no race tomorrow, that will take some time for black people to integrate to white areas because of the economic situation which Nelson Mandela are trying to create at this present moment. If you talk of sanctions, you are not trying to save the situation. If you talk of divestment, we are not solving the integration of people in South Africa.
May I back up and deal with it in another way? What is your position on apartheid that has been in South Africa for so long?
Man, I've said many times, I've made enemies, I've made friends with my talks in South Africa. The system is evil, it must go. But we differ on the strategies on how to dismantle the system. Nelson Mandela has his own ways of trying to dismantle the system. We are having, on the other hand, our own ways, which up to now we know we have been successful in negotiating with the whites in South Africa.
Let's talk a little bit about the strategies that you and Mr. Mandela disagree on. Nelson Mandela used, as I understand it, and continues to use a lot of the strategies that we use in this country, where people gather and they march and they demonstrate and they defy some of the laws. And in his case, like a number of black leaders in this country, he went to jail. You've already made it clear that you disagree with this strategy. In what way would you work, or your organization and party work, to bring an end to apartheid?
Number one, I don't think boycotts and stayaways are going to solve anything to the problems in South Africa. No government, even in your own country, will listen to people who are shouting on the streets of this country. The government will change the system if people become constructively by presenting memorandums to the government. I think my group has been doing just the kind of a situation. We have never engaged ourselves into street violence where it becomes a useless and a stupid violence, as far as I'm concerned, where blacks are killing other blacks. And you say to America, I'm trying to solve the problem of blacks in South Africa. At this hour, it is not whites who have become the enemy of this whole thing, because whites have realized at a long last they could not have a situation of a lasting solution in South Africa without having blacks within the decision making into that country.
When you indicate that you and your party issue proclamations, so forth, the government, could you explain more in detail what you're doing?
Number one, the Immorality Act, which was there in the statute book, where one could not make love across the color line. The influx control, which was preventing the moving of blacks from the different parts of South Africa. The Urban Areas Act of 1945. All those laws were not removed because of the ANC doing anything to that kind of a situation. Forces inside South Africa were involved in negotiating. I can, at this present moment, I'm not in a position to show you memorandums which we sent to the government and replies that they were doing away with the influx control, with many of those laws which we have been fighting.
I guess what I wish to do is to, in discussing with you, is to challenge the fact that it's very hard to prove, is it not, that those who disagree with your approach and the fact that they have put on pressure both in the country and other countries have boycotted South Africa and economic boycotts. How do you prove that that has not had an impact in changing the South African government, but your approach has affected the government?
Yes. If you talk of the sanctions and divestment, they've got its negative effects on the economy of South Africa, because business people from South Africa, they cannot be able to come to your financial houses. South Africa cannot be able to sell of its raw products to this country. But back home to South Africa, who suffers most with your sanctions and divestment? The very people whom everybody always say in this country, we are trying to help the black people to eradicate the apartheid system. But these are the people who lost their jobs in South Africa. These are the people who lost their homes in South Africa. These are the people who lost even the study and aid bursaries which your firms were offering to black people in furthering their education in South Africa.
Are you indicating that if none of those techniques have been used, that today you would be at the point that you are with
yes,
with decline of apartheid?
Yes, 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 with no doubt. I can say to you with no doubt, we have made an impact by negotiating with the whites in South Africa. They must change their hearts towards black people. Also black people to change their hearts towards white people in South Africa. We must not look at people on the faces. We must look at to everybody in South Africa as human beings.
I guess the question the bottom line I'm getting at is that the fact there was such tremendous pressure that was applied both internally and externally on the South African government by Mr. Mandela and other groups and countries did that make the government more willing to negotiate with you and your organization also?
Man, that's sensation. You are talking of sensation. What you are talking of people in America and everywhere about the sensation of the anti-apartheid groups that were doing in their countries. That was sensation and emotionalism to this country. But back to South Africa, it has nothing to do with the white South Africans. You are not talking of a timid nation if you are talking of the Afrikaner. They would not have listened to those things that were made outside. So after all, the South African government have every capability of crossing our borders in going to places where the ANC was and destroying them there. But there were forces in South Africa who have been constructively been engaged in negotiating for a just change in South Africa.
I will continue later, but Janelle Burke's turn.
Just to follow up a little bit on what Tony has been asking about, then what is the source of Nelson Mandela's power, or does he have power? Do you perceive him as having power, and if so, what is the source of that power?
He has no power. It has proved, even to you people in this country, even to his friends, he has no power within the political situation in South Africa. It has proved with the violence. He was unable to contain or change the violence in South Africa. He has no power. Only the ANC and the communists are using with Nelson Mandela. They are using his stature because he has been in jail. For every person in this country and everywhere will be so sympathetic to Mandela because he has served 27 years in jail.
Do you see it as being a product of the press, then, of the media? Is that what you are saying?
Ma'am, Mandela has become a media creation in your country and everywhere. He is a media creation, which they try to create everything that is good out of Nelson Mandela, of which I'm not saying in this platform as a black South African, fortunately enough as a Xhosa, the same tribe as Nelson Mandela. I'm not a Zulu.
Now, as in your country, just to help our viewers understand, how many political parties are there? Are there a number of political parties, or are there one or two that are certainly dominant? For example, in our country, the Republicans and the Democrats are certainly dominant, although there are a number of people who would say, I vote for the individual, or some people who would even see themselves as being independents, in addition to some splinter groups who have political power, depending, of course, on the issue. So how would you see politics in your country? Are there some major parties? Are there some major groups? And what would you say those would be? How would you identify them?
The ANC is one of the many other political parties which are there in South Africa. Just like Nelson Mandela being one of the leaders who are there, many other leaders within the political situation in South Africa. So the ANC is not the only political party.
And you're saying that you are a member of a particular political party as well.
Yes.
How many major political parties would you
We've got
count?
the Pan-Africanist Congress, who broke away from the ANC when they started their military wing. You've got the Inkatha Freedom Party of Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. You've got the United Christian Conciliation Party, of which I'm co-president with Bishop Mukwena. You've got the FIDA from John Kokocha. You've got the National Forum from John Mavuso. And there are other civic bodies other than what I've explained here.
And would you say that most people are a member of one of those groups, or are a good number of people, the rank and file person is just tends to go toward one or the other of the groups if they're dealing with an issue that person is particularly interested in, but the remainder of the time they're not particularly a member of any group?
The people belongs to any group they want to join in South Africa, which is what the ANC is trying to destroy at this present moment. The ANC is embarked at this present moment in violence, where they are trying to scare and intimidate everybody to be part of the ANC. If you are not part of the ANC, you know you are going to be subjected to violence.
In answering Janelle Burke's question, you indicated that in your opinion, Mr. Mandela does not have power. And I'd ask you to respond to these facts.
Thank you.
Yes. As Mr. Mandela travels around the world, and when he came to the United States, he met with the president, he met with the Congress, he met with senators and governors and mayors. As he goes to other countries, he has the ability to meet with leaders of the world. And as he does that, and as those countries put pressure on South Africa, would you not have to concede, even though you disagree with his tactics, would you not have to concede he does have great influence in the world?
Because of sensation. I am going to answer you because of sensation. Even those people have become sensational on the issue of South Africa, have become sensational because Mandela has been in jail for 27 years. They meet with Nelson Mandela, but back to South Africa. Are they studying the truly facts, or how Nelson Mandela is he going to change the situation about in South Africa? How Nelson Mandela, in the first place, was convicted in South Africa?
I guess one of the questions I'm asking, though, is...
I think we won't come together. We won't come together because I'm not going to come to what you are asking, because really Nelson Mandela, he might have the influence within your country. But back to South Africa, the crux of the matter is in South Africa. Does people in South Africa also come to Nelson Mandela? I say no.
I guess what I'm asking in relation to the South African government that exists today, as Mr. Mandela goes around the world, and lots of countries, not just the United States, but countries around the world, indicate to the South African government that they do listen to Mr. Mandela and they do want changes. Perception and influence and power is very, very important. And doesn't that require the South African government to take steps it would not take if those actions weren't in place?
No. After all, Mandela was released only this year. To tell you the honest fact, the changes in South Africa have taken place while Mr. Mandela was even in prison. A lot of changes has taken place to South Africa. So South Africa became a republic in '61. And if you take the changes that has taken place into South Africa, and you check what your country has gone 180 years to be where you are at this present moment, it's a question of even for your country and everywhere where they could not accept the changes that were going on in South Africa. We need more. We need Nelson Mandela out of jail. We need, because everybody tends to think we will have peace in South Africa if we've got a black government. But I'm saying to you, it will be back to square one. There will be no peace.
I guess I'm, in our friendly dialogue, I guess I'm having some problems with your thesis in the sense, I want to take it from another angle.
We will get problems because I'm not going to agree to what you're asking.
No, I didn't ask that. I just want you to explain.
No, I will explain, but I'm not going to agree to every concept you're trying to put on me.
Yes, that's your perfect right not to agree.
Yes.
I want to take it from another angle, however. If one takes a look at history, and Gandhi, for example, in India, when he was struggling for independence from the British, he took direct action. It was nonviolent. But he took many walks and demonstrations and defying the laws that existed. Dr. King in this country, who was nonviolent, discovered that the courts...
If he was not. Dr. King, if he was not.
Dr. King realized that the government was not moving, the government was not heeding the wishes of the civil rights movement, and therefore he used nonviolence, but he used sit-ins and he used demonstrations to get the attention of the government. And so I'm just indicating that Mandela is following some of the paths of Gandhi and King to get the attention of the government. Isn't it hard to state that historically from that evidence that has not been effective?
That's not, because in South Africa I see what is different, where blacks are killing other blacks under the guise of the ANC and Nelson Mandela.
Yes, I wasn't speaking to the violence as such as I was speaking to...
But you are talking of the strategies which Nelson Mandela is using, similar to what your Dr. King was doing in this country, mass mobilization of people. But what this mass mobilization ends up in South Africa, it ends up in violence where blacks are killing other blacks, because if I happen not to agree with that kind of mass mobilization, then I'm subjected to violence.
I guess I even go back in history a little bit further. When we had the terrible period of slavery in this country, unfortunately, in that case, a civil war is what brought an end to slavery.
And I want to tell you again, slavery in South Africa is never you can never compare your slavery with the apartheid system in South Africa.
Janelle Burke.
Well, you talked earlier in the program a little bit about negotiation as being a strategy that you preferred. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are your goals? What are the goals of your party in negotiation?
Number one, we would love to see peaceful change within the system in South Africa. We would love to have open negotiation where every political party will be accorded a political standing. We'd love to see South Africa in a multi-party democracy.
Okay, that's one of your goals,
Yes.
is the multi-party democracy.
Yes.
Okay, how about some more? Keep going.
Yeah, some more. Where we will have a South Africa where everybody will be equal before the law. South Africa where there will be no racist laws. We see South Africa in a way with the elections going on in your country. You've got some elections in this country, but you never had a system where we talked of one man, one vote, a majority rule in a unitary state.
And so these are goals that you have, and you prefer to reach these through a negotiating process.
Yes.
Now, how do you see that process as working?
It's working 100%, ma'am, because at this hour, The whites have shown by every standard that they want the black people to come to the negotiation table. Again, it's what my friend was trying to explain, mass mobilization, which ends up in trying to block the other groupings from coming to a negotiation table through violence, where people, if I want to be part of the process in South Africa, I have to belong to the ANC. If I don't want it, then I have to lose my property, I have to be subjected to violence.
And that, of course, is what you don't want to do.
That's what we don't want to do.
And as you sit down at the negotiating table, how do you see the progress as having been? Do you think there is progress, or do you think what is going to make change
The problem is we have
occur?
not yet started with the negotiation. The problem, South Africa have not started with negotiation. Now, I cannot say I see change in progress with negotiations, because negotiations have not started. We are still talking of going to a negotiation situation.
And do you see that as being something that you think is going to happen in the near future then?
It will happen if the violence would really come to a stop, because I cannot blame Mr. de Klerk if now he is delaying things, because when there is violence, you don't know whom to say you must come to this, you must do this.
So far, though, you talked earlier of papers, of memorandums. That has occurred.
That has occurred, ma'am. That has occurred. We have presented memorandums, and we have replies from the government where they said in such time there will be, such law will be scrapped from the statute book.
And when you present these memorandums, do you make those public?
Yes, we made those things public in South Africa. They know. The papers know.
And how about the government? Do they respond? You've indicated they do respond, but do they respond in public as well?
Yeah, they respond as public. We have appeared when the government scrapped the influx control on papers with the government, where we said to the government they must give us more funds in running the townships, because you find, if you read from that paper, they've said they have got 400,000 inhabitants of my area. But there were people who were not counted from the census of that township because they were not registered according to the influx control.
Have you been pleased with the responses of the government, or do you feel that the government could go further?
I've been pleased with the change we have seen this past 20 years in South Africa. I am living there. Even the people who have been released from jail from the ANC, they have openly said, really, the township they see is not what they left in 1960 when they were sentenced.
Now, you've talked a little bit about the apartheid, but also it's my understanding that the conditions of many people in your country, the living conditions, are very poor. Do you perceive them to be that way?
That's what we have been trying. As a mayor, I was elected in 1982 in Port Elizabeth. 3 townships have been developed from nowhere, from an open ground. It was the kind of a situation because we were trying to take people from those bad conditions and place them on other housing conditions in South Africa, where we could go back to where they were living before and put the infrastructure and develop those areas. That's when I started this. The putting of houses, I've come to that conclusion. We have come to the conclusion that it was not part of the government only. It was part of the private sector, also giving open land to people to develop themselves.
And so you recognize that a lot of people are living in less than perfect conditions.
Yes, no one can run. They say the apartheid policy has been good to South Africa. It has not been good. No one will ever say. I'm not saying that it has been a holy cow even at this present moment, but the people of South Africa, black and white, are trying to rectify the situation.
You're indicating that there's still negotiations going on about the negotiations, that you're trying to get at the table to talk about a lot of the proposals. In your view, what will happen? Could you identify the groups that you think are parties that will wind up sitting down with the government? And my second part of the question is, once you identify those, are you willing to sit down with Mr. Mandela and his organization as well as other political groups?
I've got no problem with Nelson Mandela. I've got no problem to Nelson Mandela as a person. I'm opposed to the policies that Nelson Mandela is trying to impose on South Africa. I will sit in any negotiation table. I will sit with any man. I've said many years, many times, I've been quoted as saying that even in South Africa.
In your estimate, as an expert who has been working on this a long time, how many political parties or organizations you think will wind up sitting at the table when it takes place?
Every political party which I've mentioned,
Those you mentioned?
Earlier, they will sit down on the negotiation table. It's every cry from everybody that everybody should be accorded a place within the negotiation table.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the negotiations when they take place. You've mentioned in response to Janelle Burke that something about the type of government that you'd like to see. Could you give us some more detail, particularly from your perspective, some of the issues that need to be resolved, and what will be the final formation of the government?
Number one, we must find a political solution within the problems of South Africa. Political solution won't be found if we are going to have some segments within the population of South Africa which we are going to left them out of negotiation.
In creating that structure, with a parliament,
yes,
and leadership, do you see that there would be some kind of provisions that different portions of the population would receive a certain number of the seats in the parliament? One of I understand the obstacles for the government is that the white population will, of course, be a minority when there's equal and universal suffrage. How are you proposing to deal with it?
Even from the blacks' side. Never think even from the blacks, because if you are talking of majority tribes in South Africa, you'll be talking of the Zulus and the Xhosas. Most of other black tribes, you find them, they are minority tribes, of which in any future constitution, you must not undermine them because they are minorities and you don't think of them. You do think they will not survive and they will accept because they are minority. They will not, even those tribes. That's where I see. I've been a person who tries to compromise. I've said one man, one vote system in a unitary system. We must compromise with this kind of voting system because many whites are afraid because they know one man, one vote in a unitary system, what it means in many countries in Africa at this present moment. It's a situation which we must come to accept the problems which South Africa at last is the only colonial country which is at present trying to solve its problems. But we must not try and create the problems which Africa has gone to. That's where we'll be making a mistake. We must try to rectify the mistake which Africa has done with this whole concept.
I understand. You do support the one person, one vote, or will you compromise on the one person, one vote?
Let's talk of one man, one vote. And then you don't go to say one man, one vote in a unitary system. Mm-hmm. Because these are two different things. If you talk of a unitary state, you talk of everybody being put into a bottle and you screw the lid of that bottle and then you left those people. And then what comes out of this is a dictator and a life president to that country.
But by having a one person, one vote, you're indicating there are many political parties and many factions in the country, so there will be somewhat of coalition form of government?
Yes, we find there will be some sort of alliances between black and white in that kind of a situation.
But isn't one of the problems that's been holding up negotiations that the white government has insisted for a very long time that they have control, have a majority, or at least a majority in one house of the legislative body?
The problem is it's not coming from the people of South Africa. The delay is not coming from the people of South Africa. The delay is coming from the same thing we have been fighting in South Africa, where we have been saying to whites, they must stop to decide for us.
I must interrupt. We're out of time. I'm so sorry. Thank you for being with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please be with us again next week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.